All right, I'm going to call this Health and Public Safety Committee meeting to order. Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Councilman Holtz,
Present.
Councilman Curry,
Here.
Councilman Mishler,
Present?
and Councilman Henke.
Here. Thank you. Okay,
Here.
can you please read the proposed ordinance by title only?
Proposed ordinance 25-0-10, an ordinance establishing a rental inspection program for the city of Elkhart, Indiana.
Thank you. For folks in the audience, there is copies of the ordinance on the table over there if anyone would like one. And at that note, I'm going to open the floor for council discussion. I believe the Mayor's Chief of Staff has a presentation for us.
Yes, thank you for allowing us to come speak today. My name is Megan Irwin. I am the Chief of Staff for the City of Elkhart. It's good to be here. As you just heard, the ordinance that you're considering tonight in Council Committee meeting is to establish the Elkhart Rental Inspection Program, as well as the ordinance to establish the appropriation to seed fund the program. If we can pull up the PowerPoint, that would be great. Right? Thank you, Jim. If you could turn to the next slide and get started here. So the purpose of the Elkhart Rental Inspection Program is threefold, right? The first and primary focus and intention of this ordinance is to promote the health, safety, and welfare of Elkhart residents, particularly tenants who live in rental housing in Elkhart. We also want to ensure that rental housing that is offered meets minimum health and safety requirements and standards as described in the International Building Code or Property Maintenance Code and the codes of the City of Elkhart. Finally, we believe that by enforcing quality of rental housing in Elkhart, it will improve the quality of life for our tenants who live in rental housing, as well as the neighborhoods. And as you know, neighborhoods is one of the key pillars of the mayor's Aspire program, and something that we really believe will make a difference in our neighborhoods in terms of stabilizing them, increasing property values, and identifying potential issues in a proactive manner rather than a reactive manner. Next slide. So the properties that are affected by the Elkhart Rental Inspection Program are categorized into two primary categories. One is rental units, which are defined as structures that are used as home residence or sleeping unit by one or more individuals, and these are 1 to 4 unit properties. There's another category of properties known as rental unit communities. This is defined as a single or contiguous parcel that has a combined total of 5 or more rental units in those structures. So that's an important distinction, rental unit community versus rental unit, and it'll come up later in our discussion. So just want to note that difference. Primarily, the difference is important because any rental unit community may identify an exemption from city inspection if they're able to show that they have a third-party authorized inspection company that does their inspections for them. So we'll go into those details a little later. The properties that are not affected, though, include hotels, motels, and beds and breakfasts, as well as short-term rentals, owner-occupied rental units. So if the owner lives in the unit, that will not be subject to this ordinance, and also owner-occupied, and also mobile home properties will not be affected by this ordinance. What will be inspected? This is a big question, I'm sure, of the rental housing community and landlords. There are several areas of inspection that are highlighted in the ordinance themselves, including electric systems, plumbing supply, water supply, heating and air conditioning, bathroom and toilet facilities, doors, windows, stairways, and hallways, functioning smoke detectors, as well as the structure in which it's located. When we do the inspections, and I will defer any particular questions about inspections to our building commissioner when we come time to questions, but we're working on a draft inspection checklist that's basically a modified version of the Inspire standard inspection checklist that is used and promoted by HUD. And there's actually a training that you can take online to learn what those Inspire requirements are if anyone were interested in learning more about those requirements. I should say here that the intent of this is really to hone in on those health and safety matters within the home. It is not intended to look at cosmetic issues that are not related to health and safety, and it is also not intended to be punitive. Slide. So registration requirements, there are two pieces basically to this ordinance. One is the act of registration, and secondly, the act of inspection. So a registration certificate is earned when an owner applies to register their properties. The registration is intended to facilitate the scheduling of inspections. That is the purpose of the registration. We will ask for certain types of information during the registration period, including contact information of the owner, local contact information to make sure that there's somebody local that can be contacted, the nature of the building, how many units are in the building, the parcel information, and so forth that is required by the building department in order to facilitate the program. Registration will be $5 per parcel. That is also established by or restricted by state code how much we can charge and the way in which we charge the registration fee.
Point of order, are we asking for questions as you, or you want to wait till the end of your presentation?
I'd prefer to wait if that's, thank you. Registration timeline. The registration timeline, when it starts, is going to somewhat depend on when, of course, the ordinance is passed and we get all of the public notice and effective dates established. Our goal is July timeframe to start, because we need enough time to set up the registration form online and get it ready for activation. And then we are allowing for an incentive through an early registration period, which would end December 31st. So the goal then would be approximately 6 months of time in which owners of property, rental properties, can register early. And if they choose to register early and adopt and register during that early registration period, we will provide a discount on their inspection fee. So at the time that they register, they will be established as either early registrant if they register by December 31st. If they register after December 31st, they will be a regular registrant. And early registrants will be charged $30 per inspection. Regular registrants will be charged $60 per inspection. So there is quite a big incentive to make sure that owners register early. And also, once early registration period ends, there is another 6 months to register until we start enforcing registration and penalizing folks who have not yet registered. So that date would then be July 1st, 2026. after which new rental properties would have to be registered and receive an inspection prior to occupancy, and we may start issuing fines or penalties for those who have not yet registered. Also, to be clear, the registration is expected to be annual, and renewals of those annual registrations are due 90 days before expiration. So you would register, and then 9 months later, you would make sure to re-register. Okay. Sale or transfer. These are just some of the nuances of the ordinance that I think are important to folks who are concerned about how this affects them. So if an owner of a rental unit or rental housing unit community transfers those properties before a scheduled renewal date, then the new owner has to complete a new registration within 30 days. If, however, something changes about the owner, their address or contact information, or the number of units changes in the structures that they've registered, those are expected to be updated by the owner mid-year, but there's no fee for updates. All right, the inspection timeline and fees. So when an owner comes to register for the Elkhart Rental Inspection Program, they'll register their rental units and their properties, and those inspections will be scheduled around that time. So there will be plenty of notice from the time that somebody registers to the time that those units are going to be inspected. But the inspection fee itself won't be due until the inspection occurs. So hypothetically, somebody could come in, register, get scheduled 18 months from now, and pay for that $30 18 months from now when their unit is inspected. We do ask in the ordinance for the owner to provide at least 72 hours notice to the tenant in advance of the inspection so that they are aware that we're coming, but hypothetically you could provide them way more notice than that because you should know that your property is being inspected before then. One thing that's important about this process, right, is if the owner or the tenant refuses access to the property on the date of a scheduled inspection, the inspection officer can apply for a permit to make sure that the inspection occurs. In addition, irregular inspections unrelated to the every 3-year inspection may occur as they do now if on a complaint basis. So if somebody calls and complains and has a concern about the unit that they are living in, that may warrant an irregular inspection, and that also requires 72 hours notice on our part that we're coming to do an inspection. Okay. Inspection exemptions. So a rental unit or rental unit community is possibly exempt from city inspection. So there's a couple ways to become exempt from the city inspection. The unit has to be managed by a professional real estate manager or be part of a rental unit community that is managed by a professional real estate manager, and the unit has to have been inspected within the previous 12 months. Who can inspect those units in order to qualify this is restricted. So inspections that qualify include those completed by HUD, by the Indiana Housing and Community Development Association or agency, apologies, or by another federal or state agency, or a financial institution or insurance company that's authorized to do business in Indiana, or an independent inspector who's a registered architect, professional engineer, or holds a valid home inspector license and has also completed the INSPIRE training. So there's a wide range of types of individuals who may be able to do these inspections instead of the city. If an owner is able to prove that that inspection has occurred, submit their paperwork, then they will be exempt from the $30 or $60 inspection fee, and they will be considered to have satisfied the requirements. All right, registration and inspection fees in the ordinance are listed as follows. The annual registration fee is identified as a $5 registration fee. The initial inspection fee is $60, as well as the first re-inspection would be $60. If they sign up, of course, for early registration, that becomes $30 each. And then an irregular inspection fee may be $75, re-inspection for any subsequent and second and subsequent re-inspection. So if we're having to come back to the property multiple times because the violations have not been corrected after being asked to come back because they've said that they've corrected the violation, then those fees go up to $100. Fine. So in terms of compliance, there are possible violations. If those violations occur, such as a health or safety, a repair that needs to be made, those will be identified in the inspection checklist and provided to the owner to take action. They will be identified as violations. They will be notified how much time they have for correction, which may be between 10 and 60 days, depending on the immediacy or urgent nature of the repair, if it's really a health or safety issue, if it can be, depending on how long at the building commissioner's discretion, how long a repair may need to take. That may be a little bit shorter if there are really expedient needs to require that correction sooner than 10 days. The city may enter into compliance agreements, though, with the owner to address a violation if it can't be corrected in the default window. So we intend to work with folks to make sure that they have the time needed to complete the repair if they're acting with good faith. Once the inspection has occurred and all fees are paid and the inspection is satisfactory, then the owners will be issued an inspection certificate. Okay. On violations and penalties, so all owners are expected to maintain a valid registration and inspection certificates once this program gets going. Failure to register or properly identify a local contact person during the registration period is punishable by a fine of $500 per unit per day. In addition, failure to comply with the other types of violations, health or safety violations, are punishable by a fine of up to $2,500 for the first violation and up to $7,500 for the second and subsequent violation. And of course, the city may pursue collections of outstanding or unpaid fees. This is just a little bit of data on rental housing numbers in Elkhart. There are approximately 10,000 rental units in Elkhart, but if you take out the 5 or more dwelling units in the city, that number drops to about 3,834. So we expect that the majority of those that are 5 or more are going to fall under the exemption and be able to prove that they have a third party doing those inspections on their behalf. There's probably a handful that will come through and prefer that the city come do those inspections for them. But when we estimated the needs for compliance and to complete the inspections, these are the numbers that we used. The data that was used for this was a comparison of property address versus where the tax bill actually is sent. So if there was a mismatch between the property address and who's paying the tax bill, that is a likely rental. That's the standard proxy measure that's used across the U.S. when creating these kind of programs. So that's what we use. It's best practice. Obviously, once we have completed the rental registration, we will know specifically exactly how many rentals we have in Elkhart. And finally, just wanted to provide, again, the detail of the appropriation request that was made in the corresponding
let me
ordinance.
stop you
Okay.
right there.
Yep.
We can discuss that when we get to
Got it.
the next ordinance.
Sure thing.
I just don't want to get them confused there.
Okay.
Was there any more for this ordinance?
No.
Okay, at this time, I will entertain some questions from council. Councilman Curry.
Yes, I know this is going to be a lot of discussion, and we had a rental registration ordinance many, many years ago, and I think Councilman Hinkie and I were the only ones on the council that's here tonight at that time, and that was rescinded. But I think, the time has come that we look at health and safety more so than just registering homes. And I think that's the main issue now is public safety in these units. I know some of us were once landlords, kind of understand how it works and what goes on in housing. I no longer have any rental properties because of some of the challenges that were presented by it. But I think, public safety and quality of life has to be addressed in the cities. My only concern is these large apartment complexes. I know some of them, especially in my district, have several of them. And I'm not crazy about that, but I've had a lot of concerns from them. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of amendments made by this, because even though they're under management, if there's a lot of complaints and code violation where our code enforcement officers have to go there on a regular basis, I think they should be inspected on a regular basis if they're always violating the codes. And I think what we need to look at is zoning. What's going on in a lot of these rental properties? Because I get around town a lot, and there's a lot of zoning violations going on in rental properties. And it's offensive to the homeowners that own their house next door to somebody that's running a body shop or somebody that's running an auto mechanic shop in a rental property. And the complaints I get, people feel like the landlord should know what's going on in their properties. And I just think these are the things that's going to come out in these discussions. Do the landlords know what's going on in their properties? And are they concerned about the homeowners that live next door? Because this is what I've been hearing for years, that landlords are out of touch with what their tenants are doing. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the landlords to see, is that the case or is something else going on? Thank you.
Councilman Hanky.
Yeah, this is, I have a lot of questions, and I hope that we can get through most of that this evening. One, I'm not sure how this got sprung upon so quickly. There's not a lot of communication. Knowing how I feel in the past about this and knowing the history of the city, I've received 0 calls. Of course, I haven't had a call from the mayor in 3+ years. I haven't had a call on anybody in regards to this. I was on vacation and wasn't even considered as a third member of this committee if I was going to be in town. I arrived as quickly as I could just to make this meeting. So I don't appreciate if it's that important, why we couldn't have communicated, set this up. I appreciate it being in committee, however. So that's number 1 on my list. I can tell you very succinctly, our history is very poor in this area, as is the city of Goshen had a bad time there. I sold my properties in Goshen when that happened because it allowed the city to take whatever action against the homeowner, no matter what. And just quite briefly, yeah, stop that. Quite briefly, I had a multiplex property with an alleyway that was crisscrossed, but a little bit of an offset. When Borden went to semi-rigs, they kept hitting the side of my garage that had been there for 60+ years. And because of rental registration, I came before a hearing with the city of Goshen, and they told me my obligation was to move the garage. And I got out of Goshen because it was stupid, quite honestly. City of Elkhart. It sounds terrible, but let me give you Elkhart. My house specifically. I had a number of rental properties, and mine were the upscale rental properties. 1415 West Franklin, since I rebuilt the nursing home for $1.6 million. The house across was an eyesore, so I bought it and put $68,000 in the renovation of that. Was hit by variance hearings on a routine basis because I had expanded the property. Went through all the hearings, won at the end of the day, and was a registered key holder during rental registration then. A police action happened at the house. Whoops, wrong house, but over $10,000 of damage. I'm the key holder. They busted through 2 steel doors per apartment. Busted them through. In the bottom one, there was a garage door opener, but nope, didn't do that. They busted open the steel door in the garage too. No arrests, no findings, but a historic home that I preserved was now over $10,000 damaged by our police department when I'm a licensed key holder. So I, at that time, called the police department, talked to then the person who conducted the raid, and it was all over the newspapers, oh, big raid. But the side effects were, I had a guy in fetal position in the upstairs apartment. I didn't know that the property was even damaged. No one called me. No one told me. But I went in on behalf of the gas station owner, and at that time, that particular police officer said, you may want to look at your house. We gained entry, but I don't think we had any damage. The doors were off their hinges, busted down, not just open, down. I called my insurance company. Not only did they not pay for it because it was a police action, they canceled my policy on that particular house because of that police action. Did it have anything to do with? No. I questioned that officer and said, why didn't you call me? I am the key holder. Well, we didn't want you to warn the tenants that we were coming. Then why the devil am I the key holder? If you can't trust me for that, what else can you not trust me with? And frankly, I can't trust you now. So 5 steel doors busted down, furniture knocked over on preserved wooden floors original. And then we realized also, depending on if you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican in administration, whose houses get looked at. That's our history. You know it as well. There's Kevin Foy right there. He had a house burned on Middlebury Street to the ground. Did anybody call him? No. He saw it the next time he went to pick up rent. The house was
Councilman
missing.
Henke, can we please stay germane to the ordinance in front of us?
I'm saying what our history is. Why are we repeating it? So let me get to a couple of questions. I question forced inspection and what law gives us the right to enter a home when the tenant and maybe the landlord combined don't want us there. How do we get by that by law?
John?
Good evening. John Esper, Corporation Counsel. The short answer is the statutory authority is provided under Indiana law. By way of citation, it begins at 36-1-20-1. So it...
Can you repeat that one more time, please?
Yes. The statutory empowering legislation for the inspection warrant is under 36 of the Indiana Code, 36-1-20-1 and subsequent sections.
And we are comfortable, and that has been tried in court, and it was successful in other cities of our type.
I know there has been a case that has gone to the Indiana Supreme Court, and it addressed other issues on a city inspection program. The constitutionality, there was a constitutional challenge, but it wasn't under the application of the statute itself, but under a special exception that was made for 2 cities. And the Supreme Court found that the exception could not apply. And so all all cities would have to participate in the, would have to participate and could not be accepted from the program.
Now, I know you're a very competent attorney. I know you, and I appreciate your diligence, but I have questions that I know I have to ask, and that is for cities, level 2 cities in the state of Indiana that have had rental registration for, let's say, 4 or more years. What is the litigation rate? Those that have been challenged in court, those have been challenged for fines, those have been challenged for compliance, and those have been challenged for unfair practices. Is there a listing for that type of thing that we could access and see what we're up against?
There may be. I can look into the question. It's a very good question and one worth considering. I don't know whether that data has been compiled, but we may be able to get a sense of just how litigious it may be within this subject
I appreciate
area.
that. I'm just trying to, I don't want to go in blindly and say, well, what happens, happens, we'll see how it goes. And I would ask Alex, not that Alex, but Communications Alex talked to a media and talked about in 2017, the ratification. Well, actually, we annulled rental compliance in 2017 because it was that politically charged. And, we took it out for a reason. And the reason I spoke to those things is because you don't want to do that again. You don't want to fall to that low credibility of why we are doing rental inspection to begin with. So I'm going to try to go more quickly. We have a poor history. I'm looking up that in the ordinance and its cover letter, we talk about to maintain an accurate registry. Well, that can be done, quite honestly, without any form of rental registration. And we talked about it before. Look to see what utilities are in a name other than the household. We can look to see where the property tax bill goes, if it's in a holding company, if it's in receivership, if it's in whatever. There's multiple ways to find out if it's an owner occupied. And then the problem we came up with in its past, there are some houses that are in a family trust and the bills do go somewhere else. And so it's not necessarily a legitimate way to do it. But I look at it now and say, do we not have 43 current laws on the books, laws and ordinances, that speak to condition of housing, fair housing, safe housing, compliance by electrical, plumbing, and safety standards? Do we not already have variance hearings and all of those pieces already in place that have been in place since I think the latest ones were 2010, I suppose, implemented. All those laws are still on the books. We didn't omit any. We don't not enforce any of those laws, right? They're still there.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And we are enforcing them.
So we say for an accurate registry, and it's like, well, just registering your rental property is not a valid response. Because all of our, in my opinion, all of our housing standards apply to every house, rental or privately held. Doesn't really matter. It affects your neighbors, no matter. To encourage property maintenance and ensure public health and safety and welfare. And I'm not sure that I can qualify that either. You can look at my call log, and I want to ask a legal question in a moment, but you can look at my call log about all the houses I've turned in over the last 20 years. And to date, some of those houses are still in non-compliance to our current law. So, example, I know the people's names, I'm not going to say it here, but they got cited and heavily fined for having a utility trailer on the side of their property. The city, fined them and went to court after them. But the owner of that utility trailer had several pictures of other houses with an equal utility trailer or RV and no citations. How do we justify that we didn't look at that side over there, but we looked at this one individually. And I hope that was because of political reasons, because otherwise it makes no sense whatsoever. How do people hold us when they can cite other violations within our city of the exact same thing that they're going through? How do we justify ourselves? I know that's a convoluted question, but if I can point to somebody else and say, that's not fair, I'm willing to go to court to say, unless you get all these other people in compliance, why are you looking at me?
And that would be a fair assessment, but I can't speak to the particular incident that you're referring to, and without more facts, I wouldn't really be able to try to offer a legitimate explanation for why there may have been, on the surface, a disparity in the enforcement of a recognized regulation, a zoning regulation.
Because in the current laws, and it was enforced one time under Mayor Dick Moore, but a code enforcement officer cited an elderly couple, quite honestly, when they put up a handicap ramp and the ramp color didn't match the color of the trim of the house. No, it was womanized wood. But they got cited and I had to get involved. When you look around our city and say, oh my gosh, if that is something we're enforcing, you could go to probably 3 out of 10 houses on any block, realistically. I was cited, mind you, by code enforcement for not having 4 digits on my mailbox. 2 digits had fallen off, but it's not a requirement. My house number's on the house itself. That was something I did for the mailman. But I got a letter. So I'm very concerned about how we look at this. And then, more fundamentally, the character, I thought the third definition of the character of the city, and boy, that's a reach. Character of the city when we put in so many complaints about our housing conditions. Fundamentally, I think something needs to be done overall. I do. Enforce what we have on the books. I don't need to add more laws, and I think the same thing Mr. Mitchell and I agreed on when police asked for the anti-camping. We already have all the laws on the books, and we rejected it. And I'm finding really the same thing here, unless we can pinpoint a measurable outcome that we could achieve with all this effort and extra cost. Historic districts not being maintained in a historic nature by state standards. We did that. State Street, we've had complaints. Somebody was allowed to put in aluminum storm windows and somebody else was disallowed the exact same thing. Historic district. So that's a question I would have. The legal enforcement, John, I trust that you've been down that road, you've looked all that up. I had a couple of other questions in here on the PowerPoint, and whoever answers them, I'm okay with that. I just need to better understand. A rental community may be exempt from the city inspection if it meets certain criteria. However, it must register. So if I would look at the original definition of why we're getting into the rental business, I would look at them too and say, is it not their purpose of being in that is not to provide housing, it's to provide an income for the housing they provide. Cost, risk, and all the stuff associated with it. So I'm not sure how we allow someone, just because of their history, to be exempt, quite honestly, because we talk about exemption if someone is an architect. Does that make them a qualified electrical inspector? Does it make them a qualified plumbing inspector? They're an architect. Structurally, probably. But I don't know about the rest of it. If they are a registered or certified, I'm not going to say this right, and I apologize, realtor, are they qualified or not qualified? They know all this stuff more than we do. Do we qualify them or not qualify them? Registration is $5 per parcel. Is the law specific to parcel, or is it specific to unit on that parcel? Parcel. But the inspection is $60 per unit. as opposed to inspection of that particular parcel. So I have a little bit of a crossover there. I just wanted to be, it's a question I don't know the answer to, so I thought I would throw that in there. Tenant rights. I think tenant rights somewhat trump everything else that's happening. It's the tenant themselves that doesn't wish the inspection, which must mean they're quite happy with the living conditions, I guess. But boy, I would hate to go in there and find something. Now I'm stuck between reporting, not reporting. And the exact example of that is I went on inspections with Commissioner Mayfield, and we were inspecting La Casa units, Main Street La Casa. Found drugs on the kitchen table. I said, well, God, we better call the police. He said, we can't. We're here for inspection. We can't turn in the other stuff. I don't know how that happens. Shopping carts down the aisle, and it raises other concerns. And I'm sure these guys are tired of me talking about La Casa, but La Casa, nonprofit. But they get the grants. We went to look at the 12 unit they had on State Street, and they got 12 heat cooling exchangers free of charge on a grant from us, but they don't pay taxes. Landlords, private landlords, have to compete with them, and they don't pay the taxes, and they get the grants. And we're expecting more of these guys and to provide the home. So the more money we take from landlords, that's going to impact rents. Repairs, that's going to impact rents. Voluntary, I think that's a great thing. I would love to see a voluntary inspection where you get a sticker on your window of your property that said, this 2025, this property has been inspected by the city of Elkhart and meets all requirements. That should be a selling point to your property. And maybe you can raise rents because of it. I'm just saying that there's that part. I have a lot of, as you well can see, a lot of questions about where we're going with this because I don't know, and I can get very specific about the houses I cite and where they're located, the ones that have taken advantage of but are right next to Elkhart City officials' homes, and they're still out of compliance. And I don't understand, how do we not see those? But we can find those other ones. We're already pointing it out for the last how many years, including Republican and Democrat mayors. We don't unilaterally enforce anything.
Councilman Henke, do you have any further questions at this point?
How do we measure improved outcomes? How do we measure that?
That may be a question for Megan.
I
One
don't
rental
care who
property at a
answers.
time.
How do we measure that this was worthwhile, it makes sense, it was worth its cost? How do we do that?
Megan, do you want to speak to that?
Thanks. It's a great question, Councilman Henke, on how we measure outcomes. That is something that we have discussed. It is quite difficult to measure those types of outcomes from programs like this. I think you can appreciate that. It would be in order to accurately measure real impact in terms of improved safety in the city, it would take years of data to collect and monitor that. That is something that we potentially could do, whether it's worth the staff time to collect and measure that data. I think we can just have a discussion about that. But it's not something that you're going to be able to measure in the short term because, first of all, it will take 3 years, the first 3 years, before we have inspected every single unit that is eligible or required for inspection based on the sequence that we've established. And then it will take, of course, over time for compliance of the requirements as well. So it's possible to measure outcomes, but it's not something that we're going to be able to measure in the first year, for example.
And that's why I asked, had we looked up history, liability, litigation, compliance. I mean, a lot of states got rid of rental registration. Did South Bend a lot of good, didn't it? They were on national news for non-compliance in housing when we talked about someone, a HUD property that didn't have cooling, didn't have hot water, and finally it was obligated to sell. That registration didn't do a whole lot of good there either, and they
David.
exempted that building. So
We're not talking about HUD housing here. That's a completely separate federal
but
program.
we're talking about safety of our community, safety and quality
Yes,
of
sir.
life. It's the same thing. You're just picking and choosing who we're putting into those categories.
Yes, sir.
That property is that property.
However, our HUD is a completely different program with very different
Right, so
guidelines.
let's see, you brought that up. Section 8 housing, do they not automatically do the inspections before you qualify for a Section 8 certificate?
If a landlord is participating in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, yes, there is an inspection involved in that program.
And that
he-
inspection is more strenuous
And
than
they
one we
may
have.
qualify for the exemption if they complete
So
their
we're going
paperwork
to
and
have
submit it.
them go through the expense and time and effort when they're already a qualified unit inspected by a federal program.
All they have to do is provide us the documentation that the inspection has occurred.
Then, how many level 2 cities in the state of Indiana, and I have the answer, so if you don't have it, I do, have human relations commissions? Because Elkhart has one.
I do not have that.
12.
Yes.
And then human relations, what laws do they follow? The same laws that the rest of us are supposed to follow. And what's the point of human relations? And that is part of it, in part, tenant-landlord disputes. So we already have a system that a tenant can complain and the Human Relations Commission can obligate a hearing. That hearing may result in city electrical, plumbing, cooling, heating inspections. We've had that all these years. Tried to get rid of it, but taxpayers are still paying for it. Positions, hearings, it's a full commission. In fact, by law, they can make their own laws on top of our laws, but the minimum set is the current set on the books. But they can make more. We do, on average, of 3 federal claims a year. Then why do we have the commission? But I don't know how many private disputes can manage. But through its cost, it does go through the community and talk about fair housing practices. In fact, taxpayers pay for billboards that go up throughout the community. And that is a process. And that process supersedes this process. So I'm wondering, it's a duplicity of process.
Fair housing law does not address housing quality in this manner. If the Housing Relations Commission addresses housing quality, that would be outside of federal fair housing requirements. That would be something that they're doing independently.
So you know, having helped out in that area, and again, I just want this laid out so that when we go to future meetings, we may have this stuff coming back. Besides human relations can say that's an unfair, that's an unsafe area, and we are going to step into that. In fact, we're going to alert the city of Elkhart, who we're a part of, that this is a potential threat to the property, and they will contact its owner. In fact, that owner would have already been contacted because there's been a complaint of unfair practice of some kind. That's human relations. We also have child protection, we have adult protection. I mean, there's agencies on top of agencies that can step into concerns. I get the lead-based pain. I'm hoping we're past all that by now, and all the things that we do, asbestos and things of that nature. But I guess underneath this whole thing, I can't tell in our city, for the most part, I can't validate that that house is a rental comparison to that one that's in the same disrepair. I couldn't tell you if they're private or rental. I couldn't. I don't know if they're elderly people, disabled people that can't manage their affairs and we should reach out to them for a different reason. I would think that there's a better way, or maybe a more complete way to get people to register properties and inspect. Inspection is a very good voluntary thing. You can have the fire department inspect smoke detectors and things that they give away. Lead-based paint, I think there's a program that you can get inspected. The basement seeping of concrete, I forget what that's called.
Radon.
I was going to say landlords know what that stuff. Radon testing kits, and you can
And
get
nurses,
state
come on
grants. There's a lot of stuff that is out there and available. But boy, this sure doesn't look like a carrot as much as a stick. That's what it looks like.
David, if I may ask a couple questions, and do you have anything else, or is it good for right now?
I just think we're going to have a major issue with uniformity, with compliance, with valid inspections, and those that can register under somebody, or if, landlords can say, look, I got an inspector, he's an architect, we'll pay him $20, we'll get letters signed, and the city can't do anything because that's part of this program. This is going to be a pretty serious expense when you don't know what's at the other end. Thank you.
Thank you. Megan, I've had quite a few folks reach out with concerns, and here are some of them. Will this increase rents? Is the city concerned that this is going to cause the already high cost of rents to surge in our community? Is there any evidence in other communities that has passed this where we have seen rent increased? We're not reinventing the wheel here, but it would be good to know what they have seen compared to and what we can expect.
Sure, thanks. So no, we don't expect that this program is going to increase rents in any substantial way. The $60 inspection is every 3 years per unit, which averages out to less than $2 a month per unit. If the landlord chooses to pass that on to tenants, which I expect eventually that they will start building that cost in, it's a very, very small percentage of what they're paying now.
Okay, thank you. There's the same concern about leading to more evictions and homelessness due to maybe the inspectors find a home needs to be condemned or something like that. Is there any concern that this could exacerbate the housing crisis related to that?
The displacement is something that I had personally, really a concern about with the rental inspection program. But I believe that given the long lead time that we have built into this program, and knowing that landlords will have plenty of time of notice from the time that they register to when the inspections occur, that any corrections that need to be made at an individual unit level or home, if there are, for example, illegal rentals where too many people are living in a unit, that can be corrected, and that there is enough lead time that those tenants who may be displaced can find another place. But I don't expect it to be a significant issue. There are pockets that likely, may experience displacement, but it should not be a major issue, no.
Okay, and I have a couple questions about the inspections themselves, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
If you could say your name for the record, please.
Tim Bistine, City of Elkhart Building Commissioner.
All right, thanks for coming up. So my question kind of goes back to what we saw on the slide, where it said it's a modified version of kind of what HUD uses. I'm a little familiar with the standards they have, and they are pretty strict. Some refrigerators have to have independent power supplies. They have to have fancy carbon monoxide smoke detector units that are $300, things like that. I hope that we're not setting the standard higher than what the average homeowner in our community has. Are we with these inspections?
Not at all. What we will do is we will make a modified version of the HUD's inspection program, which we're currently going through. There's a lot of the stuff that they do is site-specific, where we currently right now follow the IPMC code 2018. So it's basic electric, heating and cooling, things of that nature, plumbing, looking for leaks, holes in roofs, things of that nature.
General public safety.
General maintenance that you should be doing to every property for your tenant on a day-to-day basis. And if you're not,
So you're not that concerned about chipped paint and things like that on
I'm not looking at the dishes in your sink or the piles of laundry that you have piled up. No, we're looking at site-specific issues, plumbing, electrical, heating, cooling, your hot water heater, things of that nature.
Okay. And say there is a leak you find, or maybe there's some potential roots around some plumbing, that sort of thing. Is that something that you look at the landlord and you say, hey, you have to get this fixed immediately right away, or else we're going to fine you $2,500?
As long as it's not life-threatening, you'll have ample amount of time to fix it, and we'll work with you. As long as we see forward progress and you're making forward progress to fix the problem, I do not have a problem with working with you.
Okay. Yeah, that's really my only concern is when I saw that information about HUD up there, it kind of set an alarm bell off because I know how strict those can be.
Yeah, my team and myself, we actually took the HUD exam, which consisted of about 5.5 hours of videos, a pretest, 5.5 hours of in-depth pretest in between, and then a final test.
Okay.
And I think if we can get the property owners on that level of certification and getting them thinking that way, we are going to be in the city of Elkhart way ahead of everybody else.
Well, that's good to hear, but for the purpose of this ordinance, we are just looking to make sure that seniors are safe, children are safe,
You got it.
adults are safe.
Yes.
Minor issues are not going to break the bank for them. Okay.
Not at all,
Because that's
yeah.
been a lot of the concern that I've heard is, hey, if I have to drop $1,000 of paint in this house on the walls, then I'm going to have to raise the rent, and that's going to get passed to tenants.
Yeah, I'm not looking at cosmetics. I'm not looking at, tile doesn't match or paint on a wall doesn't match that wall or ceiling.
Just if the hot water works or if the ceiling's
It's-
leaking.
It's the things that you as a landlord should have been maintaining all along in basic property maintenance.
Okay, so if these standards are already being met, if someone is already taking care of the property where all those basic life-sustaining systems are in place, then the only expenses they might have are that $30 or $60 inspection fee and that $5 annual registration, correct?
Right.
Okay,
And the great thing about the registration too, if I can just kind of go at that a little bit, I've been here 4 years and I've had a handful of times where it's taken me hours or days to find out the paper trail of who owns a property, and then only to find out a couple of days later that he sold it 2 months ago and the county has no recollection of it. We don't have a recollection of it, and I still got to find who the owner is. This is going to help out first responders more in a timely fashion, where if there's an emergency at their property, that we're going to have a list of phone numbers, emails, a way to get a hold of the landlord or a property management. So dispatch will benefit from that, police, fire, and not only us, but the code officers as well.
okay. One thing I would recommend is maybe hosting a workshop for landlords.
That's in the works.
Okay, as well as maybe a downloadable handbook that says, hey, boom, 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 here's what we're looking for, here's what we don't care about. And if we could get that on the website where it's easily accessible to folks, I think that would be a good thing as well.
Once I get this checklist finalized, and we're still working on it, we will put that out and get that out as much as we can to the public, because I think an informed public is going to be a lot better off of
Absolutely.
what we're looking for.
And going back to what Councilman Henke stated about information, I do think it would be beneficial to have anonymized inspection data available. What percentage of rental properties are passing on the first time, average time for those who don't pass to reach compliance, as well as maybe some common code violations that are identified so people could look out for those. That's all I have. I want to ask Alex, because he hasn't had a chance. Alex, did you have any questions or comments?
I do have a couple. I thinking more about the budgeting and the money. My guess is anybody who's in the audience is a responsible renter, as far as owning the property and renting to our citizens, and I appreciate that. I like the fact that it's structured that people who get in, early, first few months, I think get a 50% discount. I just wonder if it's possible for that to be ongoing. I mean, I am a little concerned about any increased cost for renters, and of course, those costs being passed along just makes sense. I don't know if it's too much to keep track of, but if you could, as long as you then, when your 3 years are up, could just pay $30 instead of $60 to redo the inspection, just to reward, again, the diligent, honorable landowners on an ongoing basis, not just when we start, but on an ongoing basis. I know then we got to think through, does that impact the money we have coming in? And I would like to go through that, and I would like to recognize that I think as a teacher, lots of times we make rules, and in this case laws, for the bad actors, and it makes a lot of the people, often over 90+% who are doing the right thing, feel like somebody's singling them out and making them feel bad about what they're doing when they're doing a great job, doing everything they should be. So anything that we could do to recognize that people being responsible, doing the right thing, and have that go on an ongoing basis, I would really appreciate that. So just a little bit of thought about what that might be and any impact that has on the budget. Just work through with it and see if we can make that happen. And again, I do appreciate everybody who's here. I'm interested to hear from the public, to be honest. I appreciate everybody's questions. They've been excellent, but I'm interested to hear also people who are actually out in the field doing this stuff. So if we could get to that part, that'd be great.
This meeting does not feature a public comment. That will be on the May 5th
Thank
meeting.
you for sharing that date.
No
So
problem.
those who are diligent and honorable could be there May 5th, because I am very interested to hear. I'll make myself available, and I'm sure everybody up here will make themselves available after this meeting as well. But then I would be interested in public input for sure. And thank you for what you all do.
Megan, real quick, it was mentioned mobile homes and mobile home parks will not be inspected. These are rented, many of them. Why are these exempt?
So in a mobile home, there's a thing called a HUD tag. And those are basically pre-manufactured homes that are made somewhere else, put together, and shipped and installed on somebody's lot. Before those buildings or mobile homes or modular homes leave that factory, they get certified by the government that the electric, the plumbing, everything in that structure is 100% to code. And then the final thing is they rivet on a HUD metal tag on that property. We do not even inspect the interior of those because of that inspection from HUD. The only thing that we would do is if a mobile home got set on a piece of property, is when they go to hook up the gas, we give a gas pressure regulating test to make sure that it's pressurized the right way. Everything on the interior of that building is all governed by the government and HUD before it leaves their factory, that it meets all their safety standards, all their codes and everything.
My only question with that is, aren't private properties and other rentals, when they're first constructed, inspected by, the fire marshal, by building code and inspectors and everything like that? But then later on, we can still go in and inspect those properties under this ordinance, even though previously they had been approved by another governing body.
Yeah, we're not doing any of the mobile homes or modular homes at all. That's been exempt, correct?
I can speak to that a little bit, Councilman Mishler. The codes are different for mobile homes, the requirements, so it would add a layer of complication for the inspection process. In addition, I think most or a fair amount of mobile homes are though they may appear to be renting by submitting their monthly payment, they're really renting the land and own the property. So that provides another kind of exception to mobile homes compared to tenants in rental communities.
I'm sorry,
rental
could you
units.
repeat the last two sentences? They're exempt because,
My understanding is that on mobile home properties, they're often renting the land and own the unit, which would
They pay lot
create
rent.
create a difference in how we would categorize mobile homes versus other types of rental units.
can we expand on that a moment?
Okay, so that
We
would
can
mean,
circle back to it later, Councilman Hinkie, if we need to do a little bit more research on
I
the
can
mobile
tell
homes.
you Boardwalk Park Place, the mobile home parks that we have, they're not 100% owned properties. They are rent-to-own. I can tell you that they lose a significant amount of value over the first 5 years. The average mobile home that is in Elkhart, we don't even know the age. I had a modular at 1456 Hudson. It was built modular, 1976. But I still had to go through inspections and everything like that, and this wording was not there. I totally disagree. If we're set up for the three reasons that we said we were set up for, property maintenance, safety, welfare, based on the age of the house, shouldn't we be looking and make the complex determine if they are the owners or, I mean, the complex should know. So that would be one I would hope you would circle back with. I mean,
did you have any other
all of my
questions?
houses, like Aaron said, all of the houses that I owned were inspected at one point. Somebody built them and they were
Sure.
inspected.
Yeah, we'll take another look at the mobile home.
My furnace tag is still on it, but doesn't mean the furnace works, right? If I could, I set down a set of questions that may help with the next time round. I don't like that we have to add people to the inspection list and the number of more phone calls and the arguments that are going to occur, because they are going to occur. So there is a cost to taxpayers, whether they're renting or owning. I have a problem with that. My biggest issue, quite honestly, is we should have had a sit-down with landlord representatives before this thing was finalized, drafted. I think that communication would have been huge for the city, had we known.
To be clear, the staff did. We did. We had a conversation with small landlords and we had a conversation with large landlords ahead of the
Because the
development
landlords
of-
that called me,
It was a handful of representative landlords.
well, none that I know then. Okay, that's interesting. The average cost per year. So we talked about increasing water rates, increasing sewer rates, and we know that that cost will be, even though whatever it is, amount percent, is going to be added on to the tenant's obligations. Why wouldn't we think, and I have a hard time believing with no history, why would we think that a new cost of registration, inspection, and compliance, which I would be interested in knowing as well, what's other cities finding as the average compliance cost per year per housing unit, and how does that not get shifted to the rents? It's a cost of operation, I get that, but someone's got to pay that. And I do know that current law says if you have a cracked outlet cover, you got to replace that.
That's where I will say, that's where the staff discretion comes in, and in our creation of or the building commissioner and our subject matter experts, creation of the inspection program, and what gets inspected and what gets cited for violation comes into play, right?
Because
To identify.
I question if that's a current law, how do you inspect and not note that you're out of compliance with other laws? How do we, that's kind of like going with Mayfield to the La Casa property, seeing drugs on the kitchen table, but you can't report it. I feel a moral obligation that we should have done something. I don't know the circumstance, I don't know who lived there, but wow, at what point do you say yes and no? How do you pick and choose which one you're citing? And that's where I'm finding that
We'll make
I'm
sure that
concerned
we-
with the uniformity of enforcement.
We'll make sure that we have
Okay.
clear communication around what is being inspected and what is potential for citation.
And to be clear, in the previous model of when it was called rental registration back then, was there a dedicated code enforcement officer to it, or was it just between different folks who could do it if they had time, sort of thing.
Yeah. So I was not here, obviously, when when that registration program went in. But in reading back through the ordinance that was passed in 2007, the previous version of this was a rental registration only and did not have an inspection component. And it was geared toward providing information to our public safety for contact information. That program was completely different than the program that we are presenting today in this ordinance, because this ordinance, the intent is to make sure that we are protecting our tenants and ensuring the health and safety and welfare of our tenants in Elkhart. That was not the primary intent of the registration program previously. So they are two completely separate.
Thank you. And to just go back to your question or your comment about cost, if they take the early registration, like Councilman Holt suggested, that would amount to 97 cents per unit per month for 3 years.
Yeah, and that the cost of
And hold on, let me continue there for a second. And if they did not, and they went for the $60 inspection, that would be $1.80 per unit per month for every 3 years. The average cost of rent in Elkhart is about $1,094, give or take. So for the $60 amount, that would amount to 0.16%, or if they did the $30, it'd be half of that, or 0.089% of the cost of rent. In my opinion on this, if we have the majority of landlords in Elkhart, I feel like do a great job in maintaining their property, and I don't see how the cost would be more than that if they continue to do a great job maintaining their property, as many of them do.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Not disagreeing there whatsoever. I think there's a difference in how we look at cost. And if I may, the cost to just register and inspect one time, not a great cost. The cost to comply when you don't know what you're finding at the other end, the discolored wall, is that mold? Now you're going to have to go through mold remediation, inspection, you just don't know. We don't know what we don't know. So as a business owner, you try to go to fixed costs so you can anticipate. And if you have a variable cost, you got to say, mold inspection, you know what the average cost per hour is? $3,000. Add that on. It's the cost of compliance. I didn't say the cost to register. I think that's nominal. I don't think landlords have an issue with that. I mean, there's landlords right here. I'm looking at them. I do disagree with first responder and all of that stuff. We've already proven that to be wrong. There's 2 of us right here in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 landlords, 7. 2 of us had properties disrupted. We were key holders. No one called us. No, in fact, it angered me more than anything else because I am a registered key holder. So you set an expectation that the city didn't meet. Court systems. Now you can obligate, and I'm just giving you the in front of landlords. And again, these are large landlords. These people know, along with several others I know, would have 300 plus units themselves as a collective group. In fact, there's a landlord Facebook page that we use. Landlords in general, I like it a lot of shared information. That would have been great to know. But tenant compliance is another issue. I can't stop tenants from using drugs on my property. I can't stop them from actually putting meth on the property if they wanted to and totally trash out the property. I see pictures online quite a bit. Court systems can't help you. I've won all of my cases when I take them to court. I've been paid for 2 cases out of probably 80, 90. When I sold my properties 3 years ago, I had to write off $110,000 of unpaid rents. Landlords float loans to people because they can't pay on time now. So I think that's a real issue. Sublets. I've called in about some people subletting bedrooms, boarding houses that are illegal in the city of Elkhart, but they're there. Why I have to call them in, I don't know. We have systems for that. But I do know they're there. And the higher rents go, the more boarding houses and subletting will happen. When Dave Miller put this law into effect, bless his heart, he had just bought a rental property, and it was an illegally non-conforming property. He bought a triplex. On paper, turned out it was a registered duplex. One unit had to go. Again, meeting with landlords, I think. It would be nice to know who and what landlords. I was going to ask the commissioner, but there are current, correct me if I'm wrong, current standards for water temperatures that are allowed in properties. It needs to be between this and this as far as hot water temps.
Correct.
Yep. And air temperatures, I am assuming, is the same way. It has to be somewhere between here and here. And there's also laws for infestations and that type of stuff
Correct.
already on the books. So if my water temperature is not between here and here, I have a violation. I can call in, and as a tenant, I can let the inspector in the house, whether that's a registered property or not. If the furnace isn't keeping up with the cold, I can call Elkhart City and get an inspector to come into the property. In fact, I can even call the fire department and make sure there's no CO in there. I already have that capability. Infestation, I can call. In fact, all of these, I could have actually called human relations. I can call adult protection. If I have kids in the property, I can call child protection. Fundamentally, and again, I apologize, I'm doing a switch off. I'm not that coordinated.
That's what we're here for.
Ultimately, neighborhoods and unchecked neighborhood violations have set the standard of living and housing safety practice. We didn't. It's the absence of us that allowed that neighborhood to be what it is. And that's both for private and rental properties, rental owners. It's called broken glass syndrome. We were promised exactly this very same thing. I can pull the records from 2007. It started off thinking it was all going to be that. And as a landlord, it wasn't that at all. In fact, I was very angered that what we were promised isn't at all what we ended up with. And again, communication is everything. I would think that we would have had set measures of practice. Unlike whatever you think we can say, well, we're not going to pay attention to that. That's not legal. That's non-compliance. You're not unilaterally enforcing that law. Sorry, but if you put a ground plug in there and the green light doesn't come on, it's still a violation. Well, we're not going to check that. That's a safety issue, right? So I'm worried about what we're willing to enforce, what we're not, when the law remains the same. I'm worried about a different set of inspections and expectations depending on where you are, because we already have that. We already have that. Don't make me give addresses, because you know I've been calling them in for years now. Still not in compliance. How would we expect this to be different? How do we say we're now different? And you know the properties. I've talked to you individually about them several times.
The difference right now is that we can only go into a property on a complaint basis and look at a problem.
Yeah.
The difference is now with this ordinance, we are setting forth a precedence for the landlord to allow us to come in and assess that and make that property that much more safer.
Can I ask a question related to that real quick? So say there is an issue, and it's a relatively minor issue, and the landlord gets it fixed in 3 or 4 days. Is the reinspection fee still there to come in and check it out, or is there could be some consideration for if it's a minor fix or something they could do easier?
Commissioner, stay up if you will, Commissioner. Sorry.
John Esper, Corporation Counsel. Perhaps the best way to understand the minor violations that do not present a health and safety issue but are otherwise outside of or below the code standards for one of the codes, pick one. There are two tracks to building code enforcement and this inspection program. The inspection program is focused and centered on on safety, fire safety, health safety, those aspects. So the minor violation, if that's all it is a minor violation that's a non-conforming with one of the codes, that's a conversation with the owner. Get this repaired. We're not holding up the inspection certificate because you've passed all of the critical safety standards that we've adopted to provide minimally safe and secure households for
Because that's
our
what this
tenants.
is about.
And it's, look into this. Next time I come back through here, I'm going to ask you if that got repaired, and we have a conversation about it. And if it turns out that it's not been repaired on another occasion, then that can be the subject of a violation notice. If it's serious enough, not enough to withhold the certificate, but serious enough to say, hey, you've got a violation here. I'm going to give you a notice of violation. Get it repaired. I'll come back in 6 weeks. Here's your certificate. You've met that standard, but I'm going to come back in a month or two and ask you if that's repaired, and we'll take a look, make sure that's repaired, and I'll dismiss the notice of citation.
So there will be plenty of flexibility working with these property owners and landlords to make sure that, their concerns are listened to and issues are handled. But again, from what I'm hearing at the end of the day, this is about making sure that, hey, there's smoke detectors, there's a carbon monoxide detector. There was a terrible tragedy a couple months ago when we had a little boy die in a rental property, and several others severely had to go to the hospital. They were severely ill from it due to a lack of proper monitoring of carbon monoxide. It sounds like this is an effort to address some of those concerns to keep situations like that from ever happening again, which is good to hear. And it sounds like you are addressing some of the concerns about favoritism, about small issues getting blown up to something bigger, because like you're saying, this is a health and public safety issue. That's why this is in the committee, and I believe Councilman Curry had a question.
I don't really have a question. I just think this is a great time to really make a strong statement about the housing in Elkhart. I've lived in Elkhart all my life, and I've watched things change, some good, some bad. And some of the housing, we know a lot of the landlords live in one neighborhood, but they own the housing in another neighborhood. And it's a concern for a lot of people that own the houses in the neighborhood where the rental housing is. There should be a relationship between homeowners and landlords in that neighborhood. I'm the president of the Pierre Moran Neighborhood Association, and I hear all the concerns about rental properties. And we have reached out to landlords, say, hey, we need to talk to you about your tenants. And they have ignored us every step of the way. And people are sick of it. Landlords have to be accessible to the people that their rental properties is next to. We've heard from Perry how many years landlords shouldn't be able to buy a house and let it sit there for years and years and years. Well, it's been allowed in Elkhart, and that has to stop. If you buy the house, you do something with it within 6 months or a year, or get rid of it. But this, where Perry lives, the house next to him is a dump. And it's been a dump for years. Police have been there several times because people breaking in. That shouldn't be in our neighborhoods. Those are the kind of things we have to fix. And whoever owned that property, and we know who owned it, they need to fix it. But those are the things that need to be addressed during this discussion about this ordinance. Also, when it comes to rents in Elkhart, you talk to the average tenant, they already think the rents are out of control. Think they're way too high. think landlords are maximizing their profits. That's what tenants think, but I'm over a barrel. You know, when I tell people what I stay in my house for, they can't believe it. I said, well, you got to find a time to buy a house. Don't depend on renting because they do keep going up. And when I look at some of the older apartments we have in Elkhart, there's no way I would pay that for rent. No way. But you know, these people don't have a voice a lot of times because they don't come to these meetings. But this is what they tell me because I talk to a lot of people and move around town a lot. But we have to care about all the neighborhoods in Elkhart, not just some of them. And I can, for every story I hear about going to bat for landlords, I can tell you stories about problems with landlords' properties in close to people's houses that own their house and care about their houses and want the landlord to do something. If nothing else, answer the phone when we call. And that's why I need to be able to call the city and say, who owns this house? We need to invite him to our neighborhood meeting and talk to him about the concerns we have with his tenant. But, you know, that hasn't happened. Like I said, the landlords, a lot of them have been missing in action. And it's time that that relationship is developed between homeowners and landlords. We got a lot of things we can fix at this time. But, you know, tenants, they feel like nobody's listening to them. They just feel that all the landlords are making a whole lot of money right now and putting very little of it back into the properties that keep them upgraded and nice for the neighborhoods in which they live, occupy it. But I just think now is the time to fix it.
Thank you. You know, I think we've had a good, robust discussion. We have a lot of questions, and I'm sure we're going to continue to have questions. To my understanding, this has been pushed back to the council to the May 5th meeting. So we will have some additional time for questions as well as for public comment then. At this time, I'll entertain a motion.
Now, wait, can we not give them an expectation to come back with certain information? I think that would be helpful, or we're just going to have to start this all over and push it off again.
Do
We have a couple.
you have further questions that you would like?
I appreciate that. You know, there's a couple of things. One, there has to be a measure of success somewhere against the three stated goals. Otherwise, you know, we're just making words. So we have three stated goals, and it'd be nice to have, how are we going to measure this? Not just by how many places we've inspected, but by how do we measure satisfaction? How do we measure greater safety? Are there reduced fires? Are there something? I'm not sure what that measure is. So that would be the biggest issue I would have. Measured against the three areas, the three elements that were posted, right? That's the biggest issue?
Just to be clear, Councilman Hinkie, the three items that are listed in the memo are slightly different.
Yeah, this is on the cover.
Slightly different than the three that are identified in the ordinance. I would defer to the three that are in the ordinance. I wrote the memo a little bit before we finalized.
Well, this
the
was
ordinance.
about how accurate registry of rental properties and local contact information. When would we know we got 90% when we don't know the real number that's out there? And that would include subletting, and that would include all of those. Property maintenance, public safety, health and welfare. That's the 3 bulletin point measure. And the character and stability of residential neighborhoods. These are so vague, I'm not sure how we would say, yeah, there's a measure that we can take against that. The other part about it, though, quite honestly, Brent, whether landlord lives in the neighborhood or not, you pick...
Councilman Hinkie, I'm just looking for questions at this point.
Well, you pick up, 50% of our department heads don't live in the city of Elkhart, if you want to know the relationship of where they are, just to be honest about it.
Okay. Thank you, and I'm sure the administration will get back to us with answers to those questions. And for those in the public who continue to have questions, please reach out to those in the administration or us on council, and we will do what we can to get those answers to you. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for this ordinance to the council.
I'll give you a motion to maintain in committee for further discussion.
And I'll second that motion because I think this is good discussion. That's right. Thank you.
There is a motion and a second. Angie, would you call the roll, please?
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask whether you guys would entertain a thought. I'm interested in the public input. I mean, and I don't know if we could do that in
We
committee
can
or
do
not.
that at a
If-
committee hearing up to
I
The only issue is this was not advertised as a public hearing. I don't necessarily object in the future of having an additional committee meeting where we could hear from the public prior to the council meeting. That's something we could discuss at the
I think
next
that's a
council meeting.
critical element to
I
where
don't,
we're
I don't
going.
plan to vote because I'm not actually on the subcommittee. I'm glad to be here and listen to the discussion, but, you know, I would suggest, if I
Absolutely.
can even do that while I'm here, that we advertise that as a public hearing. If that's going to be the will of, it sounds like, the group, we'll see. I would suggest that.
Thank you.
Councilman Curry,
Yes.
Councilman Mishler,
Aye.
Councilman Henke. Passes 3-0 to keep it in committee.
Okay, can you please read the proposed ordinance 25-0-11 by title only, please?
Proposed ordinance 25-0-11, an ordinance appropriating $95,000 to provide initial funding to implement the Elkhart Rental Inspection Program.
All right, I'll open it up for discussion. To be clear on that last motion, we don't really have a parliamentary motion for keeping it in committee. Was that a no recommendation vote?
I appreciate that after, you're the parliamentarian anyhow, but after hearing you say that, that is correct.
Okay, so that was, just to confirm for the record, a vote of no recommendation. Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
And to hold in committee, because no recommendation can also go back to the full council. I'd like to be no recommendation to stay in committee. Right, Mr. Curry? We're keeping it to committee for further discussion.
Yeah, let's keep
He's
it in
just saying
committee.
it the legal way.
Yeah, okay. Do we have a presentation for the next ordinance?
Sure. So the associated appropriation request for the Elkhart Rental Inspection Program is for a total of $95,000. That covers the cost of a code enforcement officer who will be the primary inspector for the Elkhart Rental Inspection Program. That covers 6 months of that person's time at a midpoint salary range for a code enforcement officer, including benefits. And then also about $1,600 for supplies, $1,100 to cover the cost of the cell phone and data charges as they will be out and about on a day-to-day basis, and $40,000 for a vehicle for the use for this purpose.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions? Councilman Henke.
I just have, I mean, here's a real cost. It's measurable. It's going to get passed on to taxpayers. It's the budget, so it's obviously going to be a taxpayer cost. An increase of cost of operation, which I would just make the parallel that that's really how these other costs are going to be to landlords and then tenants. I would also ask that this too stay to committee without any other motion to approve or disapprove, only because it's predicated upon the first ordinance. And that would save us the conversation that we can have at a later date, if that's okay with you. That is my motion.
So you make a motion.
Not yet. I'd like to make a comment on this ordinance.
Well, that's
So I
up to
won't
the
second the
chairman,
ordinance.
but
Second
I'm
your
just saying
motion
that's
just
where I'll
yet.
end up.
But, you know, I just think when you when you need a person to inspect all these different issues, you know, when you start talking about electrical and plumbing and heating, you need somebody that's multi-talented. And most of these are highly skilled people that know what they're doing. You got some people out there that don't know what they're doing. They think they do. So, yeah, we need a good person. You got to pay them well to make sure when we get these inspections done that they were done properly and we know the condition in which these places that people live are in. So, yeah, I think this is a good discussion we're going to have, and I think it needs to stay in discussion, and we'll hear from the landlords also on about how these things go about and getting inspected.
Before we move to a motion, just a couple quick questions. One is the funds that are collected from this ordinance, will those be used to offset this cost at all?
Yes, the fund that is created to collect the fees associated with the Elkhart Rental Inspection Program will serve to support the costs that you see on the appropriation request on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. The other more comment I have is, you know, our population is about 32% Latino in the city of Elkhart. I strongly encourage whoever is potentially selected for this position, if it were to pass, is capable of speaking Spanish, if not additional languages as well, to help de-escalate situations and talk to tenants as well as landlords. I think that's an important aspect we should consider.
Good points that I missed, Mr. Mishler. I appreciate that. Indiana state law provides us direction that says, you know, that the revenue goes to where the cost came from, but it seems as though that should be spelled out in the ordinance as well. That we need to have a loop that says, all right, revenues generated.
I believe it is in the ordinance.
Did I see it? I see the cost. I don't see the revenue side saying that it will be returned. If it says an offset, it should say an offset of 100%. It should give us, that way we can say, well, yeah, 50% of what we collected went to cover the cost. The other 50% was to enlarge a program. I would like to see that we're doing our best.
I believe it is under 161-12, Elkhart Rental Inspection Fund.
You have a page?
Yes, that is page 11. Any fee collected pertaining to the Elkhart Rental Inspection Fund shall be deposited into the Elkhart Rental Inspection Fund, which fund shall be contained within the operating budget of the enforcement authority. Said fund shall be administered in accordance with Indiana Code 36-1-20-3. John, is that essentially what he's asking for, if you would so kindly?
Does that mean any and all, or just any portion of? Is it, how does the law read on that end?
It reads, all revenue generated by reason of the program is funded to the program, to the fund that must be established for the program, and it's a non-reverting fund to support the program.
But does that mean, though, legally that 100% of the collection goes into that fund?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any grants to offset any other portion of this cost? Anybody look at that?
New grant money is hard to come by these days.
So is money to cover cost of all this stuff, but good fall in, John. I would just like to know, though, for the public's sake, that maybe we looked at grants to see, and you could check it off the box. If it's not available, it's not available.
And one thing to note, too, that $90,000 is a one-time cost because it does include the entirety won't be a one-time cost, but because it includes a vehicle and things like that, moving forward, the cost will only be for the benefits and wages of that code enforcement officer, which will be supplemented by any proceeds collected from this, correct? So it'll be less than what cost for an average code inspector position.
The revenue that will be collected is not expected to fully cover the cost of the inspection.
Right, right.
But to answer your question on grants, we're always seeking grant opportunities. I don't know that you could make an assumption that grant funding could cover on an annual ongoing basis. Grants have restrictions and are competitive. So, possibly grant funding could periodically cover some of these costs.
Or to initiate a program. I don't know the answer to that. I
Yeah.
don't look up the grants and so on. But I do know, history tells us that we add on positions that sometimes we forget they were added on for a purpose, that should this cease to exist in the future or not get off the ground, obviously we won't have it. But in the future, we just can't have an extra code enforcement officer if this then fails to exist, or obviously it can't fail if we don't have any measures of success. So there we go. Thank you.
Okay, with that said, I'll entertain a motion if there is one at this time.
Thank you. A motion to take no action to remain in committee.
So a no recommendation.
A no recommendation.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, hearing a motion and a second, Angie, would you please call the roll?
Councilman Curry,
Yes.
Councilman Mishler,
Aye.
Councilman Hanky.
Aye.
Passes 3-0 with no recommendation to remain in committee.
Being that there is no other actions to be discussed in this committee, this meeting is hereby adjourned.